You are listening to Catholic Family Podcast.
Greetings to all fellow travelers through the liturgical year. This is Lisa Davis with another Feast Day Quick Take on another little flower. St. Gabriel Possenti, the 11th of 13 children born to an Italian middle-class family in 1838, might very well be called the little flower of young men. Sadly, his mother died when he was still a small child, not an unusual thing for his time, but coincidentally similar to the early sorrow of our little flower of Lisieux. Gabriel's father was a government worker, and his family, though large for any time, was fairly solidly middle class. The Possentis did not stand out in their neighborhood, and little Gabriel was a fairly ordinary kid. The only thing a little remarkable about his birth or childhood was that he was baptized in the same font as St. Francis of Assisi. But there were no lights from heaven marking the place of his birth, and no little white bees hovering above his cradle. By all accounts, he was neither extraordinarily pious nor a particular troublemaker as a child, but he was well liked, and as an adolescent he actually had a reputation for being a bit of a flirt. He loved to dance and have a good time with his large circle of friends. He was just a normal kid. It was expected that young Gabriel would follow in his father's footsteps, winding up in a middle-class job and eventually settling down, marrying and raising a family. But God had something else in mind. When Gabriel was 14, he contracted a grave illness. On the point of death, he promised that if he were cured, he'd enter the religious life. Almost miraculously, he recovered, and of course he was grateful, but he didn't end up entering the religious life. It'd be an easy thing to second-guess or forget a rash, quote, rash promise one made in delirium, wouldn't you think? But God does not forget. And he had plans for Master Possenti. Before another year had passed, Gabriel had narrowly escaped death in a freak hunting accident. One of his brothers had died due to illness, and another had committed suicide. And before he could catch his breath, at the age of 16, Gabriel fell ill again. Once again, he promised to enter the religious life if he recovered. And this time, more conscious maybe of his mortality, he followed through, ultimately finding his home in the Passionist order. In September of 1856, when he was 18 years old, Gabriel was accepted into the novitiate at Moraville, Italy, and received the name Gabriel of Our Lady of Sorrows. A year later, he pronounced his first vows and entered the seminary. A good student, cheerful, humble, and well-liked by all, there was nothing that stood out again to the casual observer about Gabriel's next 5 years of priestly training and religious life, except perhaps his particular devotion to perfect obedience, which also sounds something like another little flower we know, doesn't it? Within the first couple years in the seminary, however, St. Gabriel contracted tuberculosis. As you've probably already guessed, he suffered patiently, just like that other little flower, praying not to be relieved of the miserable illness, but that it would be prolonged, so that he'd have more time to prepare his soul. His prayer was answered. It was not until he'd been 6 years in the seminary in almost constant illness that he died on February 27, 1862, at the age of 24, before he was able to be ordained as a priest. This fact may have been his final, humble act of obedience to the will of God. Those who were with St. Gabriel at the moment of his death recounted that, ill as he was, he sat upright in his bed just before he died, his face radiant, arms reaching for an unseen figure his eyes were fixed upon. His confessor believed that it was unquestionably the Blessed Mother who had come to accompany Gabriel Possenti to heaven. Convinced of St. Gabriel's holiness, having followed his spiritual progress as his confessor, and having read St. Gabriel's memoirs, which Gabriel burned in order to prevent a spirit of pride in himself, Father Norbert of Holy Mary wrote Gabriel's biography shortly after his death, and word of the young seminarian's sanctity spread astonishingly quickly. The congregation of the Passionists, spurred forward by the devotion that had sprung up and persevered, as well as the miracles reported, began the process for his canonization in 1891. Pope St. Pius X beatified him in 1908, and St. Gabriel was raised to the altar by Pope Benedict XV on May 13, 1920. St. Gabriel of the Sorrowful Mother, another saint of the little way. Like Saint Therese, Saint Gabriel was not a saint of the extraordinary. He left no published works outside of a few surviving letters. He didn't publicly convert thousands. He never traveled outside a small area in Italy. He didn't perform extraordinary acts of penance or outstanding feats of great charity. He never even got to offer Mass. But like St. Teresa Little Flower, he performed many little things very well, intentionally offering up every little duty out of love for God. He smiled when he was grumpy. He did chores without complaint, even when he wasn't feeling well. He obeyed unquestioningly, even when an order from a superior made no sense to him. He suffered illness with resignation. He abandoned his own will to God's in patience and great love. Like St. Therese of Lisieux, his was a simple, though not easy, path to sanctification. God allowed many crosses to test his resolve, and Gabriel didn't always succeed at his first attempts. His trials provide a great example for young people discerning. Young Gabriel proved that you can stumble and fail and recover and push forward in the search for a vocation. Then you buckle down and persevere to find and day by day, moment by moment, do the will of God and become a saint. It's no wonder the Church has chosen St. Gabriel Possenti as the patron saint of youth, particularly of students, seminarians, and clerics. Young and old, though, we can all learn from his little way. God's garden has endless room for more little flowers. And incidentally, happy name day to our own Gabriel and all the other Gabriels out there. This is Lisa, signing off.
You've been listening to the Catholic Family Podcast. If you enjoyed this show, please share it with your friends and family. You can support the production on Patreon and PayPal, and you can reach Kevin at kevin89davis@gmail.com. Ad Maiorem Dei Gloriam, all for the greater glory of God.